Hello, my name is Adish Ambadi. I'm a junior at Archbishop Mady High School in California, and my project is called a contactless vital signs monitor using photoplethysmographic imaging, infrared sensing techniques, and computer vision. When I was in middle school, my mother experienced sudden and unexplained blackouts. These blackouts eventually culminated in her collapsing on her office floor and us rushing her to the emergency room. It was there that we found out that my mother experienced a third-degree heart block and required immediate surgery. After the surgery and during her recovery period at the hospital, I was distraught to see my mother lying there limp on her hospital bed, tethered to countless vital signs monitors. After she fully recovered and was able to leave the hospital, she told me how being hooked up to these vital signs monitors and how it hindered her movement, which actually made her feel even more depressed and even more sick than she actually felt. This inspired me to build a contactless vital signs monitor that does not obstruct a patient's movement at all. Then, news of the Ebola and Zika pandemics ravaging frontline healthcare workers further strengthened my desire to build this device. And today, in this COVID-19 pandemic that is almost reaching its first anniversary, I see the need even more so to build a contactless vital signs monitor that can help protect the lives of healthcare workers and help our patients feel even more comfortable. I developed a prototype that uses a Raspberry Pi 4, a MLX Nano 640 thermal IR camera, a Raspberry Pi camera, and open computer vision software that detects all 5 major vital signs. After determining these vital signs, it sends that information over via the cloud through Amazon Web Services to an app that I developed through Ionic app development software. The patient, healthcare provider, or guardian can thus use the app to monitor the patient even remotely.
My device has 2 main parts. First, the Pimoroni MLX 9640 thermal IR camera and the Raspberry Pi near-infrared camera. The thermal IR camera outputs any object in front of it in the form of a heat map. Here you can clearly see an image of my hand. Next, the normal camera sends its video feed to the Raspberry Pi, where the video feed is analyzed to output the heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and blood oxygen levels. All of this information is then sent over to the app that displays these 5 main vital signs along with the photo of the patient, or me. And lastly, which is really cool, the device also displays a video of the patient. It does all of this entirely contactlessly.
The MLX Nano 640 thermal sensor detects and reads the patient's thermal profile. Then, after analyzing this profile, the code determines the patient's skin temperature. For heart rate, the program uses a combination of open CV software, remote photoplethysmography, and fast Fourier transformation in order to detect it. First, the forehead region of the patient is isolated using open CV software. From there, the forehead region is analyzed and split into its composite colors of red, green, and blue. We isolate the green section in order to use it for remote photoplethysmography. Remote photoplethysmography technique works like this. As the heart expands and contracts, it releases more or less blood into the peripheral capillaries. And because of this, there are slight fluctuations in the amount of red blood cells that are in your peripheral capillaries, like in your forehead region. These slight fluctuations of red blood cells absorb varying amounts of green light, and by amplifying these varying amounts, you can thus detect a green light absorption curve. This green light absorption curve is a composite wave, and if you apply the fast Fourier transformation on top of that composite wave, you can isolate the most dominant signal, which is more often than not the heart rate. By applying the fast Fourier transformation, isolating the dominant signal, and thus taking the frequency of that dominant signal, we can thus detect the heart rate of the patient. Interestingly, like how we can extract heart rate from a composite green light absorption wave, we can also extract respiratory rate from a composite red light absorption wave. However, when we apply the fast Fourier transform to the red light composite wave, we cannot extract the most dominant signal as the respiratory rate. Instead, we must apply a bandpass filter from 0.1 to 0.3 Hz and multiply that dominant signal within this frequency range by 60 to find the respiratory rate. Oxygen levels of the patient were identified from a formula found in Kanva et al. 2014. In this paper, they identified a formula that essentially compares the varying composition of blue and red pixel counts of the patient's face in order to determine the overall blood oxygen content of the patient. So by using this formula and by plugging in the blue and red pixel counts, we're able to estimate the patient's blood oxygen levels. And the last vital sign was blood pressure. Blood pressure was calculated through an estimation algorithm identified in Chandrasekhar in 2013. In this algorithm, the height and the weight of the patient are used to identify the stroke volume. Then taking the stroke volume, heart rate, age, and other experimental constants, one can identify the diastolic and systolic blood pressures. Of course, this is an estimation, but it still serves its purpose in identifying a normal blood pressure given these other variables. Now that we identified how the device measures 5 main vital signs, let's take a closer look at some of the other functionalities. There is, of course, the app, which is a streamlined user interface for the guardian to monitor the patient. There's the alert functionality that notifies the guardian of any vital sign abnormality. And then there's the image and video of the patient, which are sent to the app at a regular interval. And finally, there is the audio and visual stimulation, which is used to attract the patient's attention, especially in the cases of younger patients, such as infants. Next, we can see the functional diagram that displays clearly how information is transferred from each step to the next. In step 1, information from the 3 main sensors are analyzed by the Raspberry Pi. This then sends the vital signs to the Amazon Web Services, which then sends the data to the Android SDK to display it on the app. Lastly, here are some images that'll help one in understanding the analysis of each of the 2 main vital signs of heart rate and temperature. To the right, we can see the heart rate analysis, which includes the isolation of the forehead in the green box, as well as the green light wave it produced. And to the left, we can see an infrared heat map of the patient that the MLEX 9640 thermal IR camera identifies. I tested my prototype a total of 1,218 times, with 25 tests per each individual test subject. I had 48 test subjects, which means that I had total of 1,200 tests plus 18 additional functionality tests, and you get to the 1,218 tests that I conducted. You can clearly see the accuracies listed here, but more importantly, you need to understand that the temperature, respiration rate, and blood oxygen levels all exceeded my expectations. Heart rate and blood pressure were the only 2 vital signs that seemed to do worse than my goal. And the reason is that heart rate was being misled by artificial light frequency. Remember, the heart rate is determined by taking the most dominant signal from that green light fluctuation wave. But under artificial light, which flickers at an extremely constant and strong frequency, the artificial light frequency was more strong than the heart rate. So the fast Fourier transform was selecting that over the actual heart rate. And so when I was testing under artificial light conditions, the frequencies would fluctuate greatly. But when under natural light, the accuracies were far more consistent. And because the heart rate is used in the blood pressure equation, any inaccuracy within the heart rate was further expanded in the blood pressure. And that's why these 2 vital signs, for the testing purposes, had a lower accuracy than my goal. This project taught me the importance of the iterative designing process, in which you build one functionality after testing the previous one. In doing so, you can build the best and most capable device for your goal. Second, this project was largely successful as the final product had only costed $130 and had an accuracy of 87.8%. And finally, third, it has many different applications. First, its remote monitoring capabilities can strengthen the healthcare system by allowing doctors to monitor their patients while they're still at their homes. Second, it enables the home healthcare system to increase further, as guardians can now monitor the elderly, infants, and the sick. And even with infants, it can protect against sudden infant death syndrome. And finally, third, it can be used by healthcare professionals to prevent exposure to infectious and hazardous diseases, just like this COVID-19 pandemic. So all in all, I hope that one day this device can be used to not only strengthen the healthcare systems on all fronts, but also be used as a formidable frontline to help our healthcare professionals stay one step ahead against diseases like this COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much for listening.